come to the end of the watch after 4 hours, we haul our nets, and hopefully we'll have a good catch.
This is film of the Sweet Promise, their grandfather's boat in the 1950s, shot by a local home movie maker. To catch whitefish in those days, the family used a different technique, long lining.
Long lining was being sort of introduced throughout Cornwall as an alternative to the big mackerel drifters, and this was where you shot up to 6 or 7 miles in the extreme cases of long line with multiple hooks attached all along its length.
When you were shooting the lines, that was the most dangerous. If a hook caught in your arm or caught in your jumper, you would shout out fast. Now, where the wheelhouse was, there was always 3 knives there on a piece of leather. The nearest man would catch all that knife and cut the oarsel. Men did get them in the hand sometime, but then you cut the oarsel and you still got the hook in his hand, but then his life is all right.
Donald worked for the Stevens family in the 1950s, and he was aboard the boat on the day it was filmed. It was to be 60 years before he saw the film.
That's me, gaffing the rays in.
Working alongside Donald on that day was David Stevens, the skipper's son.
I used to do all the guttering, that's to take home, that is.
Yeah, that's me.
That's you, David?
Yeah. I wouldn't.
We're very old there.
No, 12, 13.
They had big rays too.
Good rays.
We had a big shutter rays down there, I think it was 300 odd stone. There was a lot of rays in them days.
Was you in the punt with Feather when the punt sunk?
No, Jim Mathers was. I wouldn't. I would never go in the punt. I was always on deck throwing them rays in.
I was down aboard the boats from being about 4 or 5 year old all the time. Her father was there working and you was home from school. You would be down around the harbour and down around the boats. That day the boat was landing, so I'd come down just like you do as a youngster, and thought you was helping a lot, and I would have thought it was summertime and I was off school.
You know David was going to be a good fisherman because he was that interested in everything what was going on. He'd be looking over the side, tell you what fish was coming, and there's a ray coming, or this coming, or that coming, and I think he would have left school at 12-year-old if his father would have left him, and he would be in the wheelhouse looking at the compass and doing things and sculling the punt and stuff like that. He was a boy that was always interested in fishing.
The first time I took the boat away to sea, I was only 18, and my father was ashore basically having kittens, and he was down on the cliffs at Land's End waiting for us to come back. And that was the first time I took the boat to sea. But when my father died, what I missed the most, I didn't have anybody to talk to. If I had a problem or something wasn't going right, I had nobody to come home, talk to, sort it out. Your mentor had gone.
Conger, that is.
You were inside there, huh?
Yeah. Congers hard things to gut, boy, weren't they? Always on the move, slippery as a devil.
In those days, the Sweet Promise would leave St Ives on a Monday, stay out all week, and return in time to land the fish for the market on Saturday morning. The St Ives harbour empties of water with the tide, and sometimes the boats would have to wait hours in the bay.
That's out in the bay. Raymond and me, that's me there sleeping.
Yeah.
That's Ben Phillips in his car. The dog that used to go between the horse and his hoof was called Kyle.
Yeah. The horse was Rose, wasn't it?
Rose.
Had more ice creams than anybody.
Yeah. That's all Ling or Conga there, David.
Yeah. You'd never be allowed to do that now, would you?
No, and an hygienic now, and everything used to be on the tap.
The St Ives films show a small-scale fishing community, a family affair where the boats tended to stay close to home. Alan Hopper, the marine engineer in Hull, filmed something quite different. He was recording larger and larger trawlers, travelling further and further out to sea to hunt for increasingly scarce shoals of whitefish, like cod and haddock. For these companies, staying close to Hull wasn't an option. By the 1950s, the local fishing grounds had been so overfished that the low stocks were not worth pursuing. Ken Knox, the trawler skipper, experienced these distant waters firsthand.
We would sail here up the River Humber, 23 miles from where we are now. Although we started fishing in the North Sea as we developed and the ships got more modern, more powerful, the further we could go away. And of course, the richest fishing grounds for the cod, the haddock, was on the distant grounds. Iceland being the nearest, 3 days, you could be fishing within 3 days. 5 days to Norway, to Spitsbergen, and a bit further afield would be your Newfoundlands and Greenlands, which would take 5, 6, 7 days. The North Atlantic has a reputation of its own for bad weather, gales reaching to storms, and the further to the north you went, the worse these conditions could get.
The conditions made life tough for the fishing crew and for Alan Hopper.
Of course, I was neither a cameraman nor really a fisherman, but I had been to sea and I had some experience of that. But I really found difficulty at times in bad weather, you know. I mean, when there was ice about and things like that, it could kind of get rather hairy.
Ice in itself was not too bad, but then you got a gale. You had to send your men out on the deck in these dangerous conditions to chop the ice away and keep the ship clear and seaworthy.
As the fish became ever more scarce, the companies drove constantly to find ways of fishing more efficiently. Alan and Ken were involved with one experiment that harked back to the boxing fleets of the 1930s.
Here's some transfer at sea, Ken.
Yeah, this is the action.
As you can see, we're actually doing this at Iceland on this one.
Yeah.
We had to try and come up with a scheme to improve the quality of the fish coming back from Iceland. A 23-day voyage meant that sometimes the fish was 15, 16, 17 days old, which is not the best. So by transferring the first part of the catch to a homeward-bound trawler, that would allow the ship to carry on, and he would then take a quantity of fish from another vessel that had just come on the fishing grounds. My job really was to try and work out the logistics of that, the technology of how to do it, the use of these drogues, the boxing itself, which in itself was an innovation. If you remember, up until this time we stowed all the fish in bulk. And here's the fish room shots where you can see them boxing again.
Typical Iceland cod, excellent.
However, these fish were highly prized not only by the trawlermen from Hull. As productive fishing grounds shrank, tensions grew in a battle that would eventually transform the fortunes of Britain's busiest fishing port.
The fact that distant water trawlers worked off the coasts of many other countries created a long-term conflict. That conflict was basically because many of these countries wished to take control of the fishing stocks off their coasts. They saw them as their resource. This led ultimately to disputes which manifested themselves particularly in a series of cod wars.
The most famous of these conflicts was with Iceland. Between the 1950s and the 1970s, the small but fiercely independent country gradually extended its national fishing limits to exclude foreign ships. Its navy harassed those that encroached and tried to cut their nets. In April 1974, an Icelandic gunboat skirmished with a Hull trawler, and as recorded here by a BBC film crew, they collided. Skippers on British ships were handed some unusual weapons.
In normal times, you'd just get a small amount of pepper. And we went to sea and we found out we had a huge bag of pepper. And the idea was to make pepper bombs to throw at the Icelanders. And of course...
Would that have fended them off, or would they...
No, it wouldn't have even reached them, I don't think. And then broom handles, these were our rifles.
But not kill them?
Well, you couldn't kill them with a broom handle, could you? A pepper bomb.
The last of the Cod Wars ended in 1976. Under international pressure, the British government gave way, and British vessels could no longer fish within 200 miles of Iceland. The distant water trawlers working out of Hull lost their most important fishing grounds, and the industry went into steep decline.
It was a sorry sight to see when these ships were moored up there, not moving. And we happened to have on the River Humber a couple of very large ship demolition companies, and you could see them slowly being towed down there and scrapped.
The Arctic Corsair, the last remaining Hull distant water trawler, is now a museum ship.
I remember one of my ships, the St. Cavern, and I worked my way up from galley boy, deckylaner, spare hand, third hand, fourth hand, boatswain, mate, skipper, and in between 2 trips cook. So I did